They initially had gone to that station before that second assault, but it doesn't, and at that time, Andrea did not have any injuries or visible injuries that she was showing to the police officers there, but that doesn't mean that it wasn't documented that it wasn't there, and that they weren't there. And it doesn't mean that shortly thereafter, more police became aware of what was going on, and that an investigation was started. And you're going to hear from the people involved in that investigation, and you're going to hear from the items and the evidence that was uncovered in that investigation. Like from a person by the name of Claire Cohen, a co-worker and friend of Andrea Kennedy Lacroix, who observed visible injuries to Andrea when she went to work the following day. How she observed the defendant continuously calling Andrea to the point where she actually took the phone and told the defendant to stop calling Andrea. How he didn't stop calling Andrea, he just actually turned his abuse over to Claire by accusing her of covering up for Andrea and accusing her of lying to him and trying to protect Andrea, who was cheating on him, threatening to come to her work. And in fact, he did go to her work. And again, at work, he did interact with Andrea, but then in another phone call to Claire after that point, threatening to go to another building at work. But at that point, Claire took Andrea away from that work. She actually took her to the Newton Wellesley Hospital. And she'll describe for you taking Andrea to the Newton Wellesley Hospital. And you'll hear actually how the defendant continued to call while they were en route to the Newton Wellesley Hospital. You'll hear about that investigation. You'll see medical records of what happened at the hospital. You'll see documentation that Andrea Kennedy Lacroix suffered what's called a bruised coccyx or tailbone. You'll see documentation of that in the medical records. You'll hear how the defendant continued to call both Andrea and Claire. You'll see phone records to that effect. You hear that at one point, when the defendant called Claire, he actually said that he never closed his hand, never closed his fist when he was dealing with Andrea. And you'll hear that he also said that he didn't know his own strength and how Andrea had lost so much weight that when he threw her, he pushed her, she went 15 feet in the air. But you're going to hear about that investigation and you're going to see phone records about those calls, and you're going to see phone records that show the timing of those calls and who made calls to whom. And you're going to see surveillance footage from the Maynard police that shows the timing of the fact that they were there. The first time where they did go inside, the second time where they didn't go inside, and the third time where actually Shannon goes again with her sister. And through the course of this trial, everything that Shannon Policano says under oath to you that can be corroborated will be. And everything that Claire Cohen says to you under oath that can be corroborated will be. The majority of the evidence in this case is testimonial evidence, and that means you're going to hear from what's called a percipient witness. Someone who's going to be coming in to say, this is what I did, this is what I said, this is what I saw, this is what I heard. A percipient witness. What they tell you, what those witnesses tell you while they're under oath is the evidence. It's testimonial evidence. So you're going to be deciding issues of credibility, but believability, all within the confines of the law. And in doing that, you're going to have to rely on a skill that you use each and every day. Can I rely on what this person is saying? Do I believe this person? And in doing so, you're going to be instinctively asking yourselves questions. You're going to instinctively ask yourselves how that witness testified, why that witness testified, and whether it fits in with the other evidence in this case, including phone records and medical records and text messages and all of that. At the end of the trial, I'm going to have an opportunity to come back to you, and I'm going to have an opportunity to go over all of the evidence in conjunction with the testimonial evidence and the physical evidence. For example, I'm going to have an opportunity to go over the medical records after you've heard the testimony to be able to talk about those medical records in conjunction with the testimonial evidence that you have. And at that point, When I'm able to go over all of the evidence, after all of the evidence has been presented to you, I'm going to be asking you to find this defendant guilty. I'm going to be asking you to find this defendant guilty of committing an assault and battery on Andrea Lacroix Kennedy, which caused her to have the injury to her lip that Shannon Policano saw when she came to her house that night on June 12th. I'm going to be asking you to find the defendant guilty of grabbing Andrea in front of Shannon and committing an assault and battery by putting his hands on her without her consent. I'm going to be asking you to find the defendant guilty of, after grabbing Andrea, of taking her head and slamming it off the kitchen counter. I'm going to ask you to be finding the defendant guilty of lunging at Shannon and committing what is legally called an assault when she attempted to intervene. I'm going to be asking you to find the defendant guilty of threatening to cause physical harm to Shannon Policano and threatening to cause physical harm to Andrea Kennedy Lacroix. And I'm going to be asking you to find the defendant guilty of picking Andrea Kennedy Lacroix up and throwing her into the bike rack that was hanging on the wall. What I mean by that is a bike rack, something that we don't normally think of as a dangerous weapon. But I'm going to be asking you to be listening to the testimony about a counter and about a bike rack and about whether they did or did not cause serious bodily injury, whether they were capable of causing serious bodily injury. And finally, I'm going to be asking you to find the defendant guilty of attempting to intimidate Shannon into not reporting his actions of that night. You may be wondering, at this point, in terms of the witnesses that you're going to be testifying, the witnesses that are going to be testifying, when the Commonwealth is introducing its evidence, as I said, you're going to be hearing from Shannon Policano, you're going to be hearing from Claire Cohen, you're going to be hearing from other individuals who interacted with Andrea Kennedy Lacroix that night and the next day. You're going to hear from other witnesses who conducted the course of the investigation in this case. Andrea Kennedy Lacroix will not be a Commonwealth witness in this case. However, this trial will show that this defendant abused her, and that he ultimately made the decision to do so in front of Shannon Policano. When she intervened, he ultimately abused Shannon Policano as well. This trial will show that this defendant is guilty, and it will cause you to have no reasonable doubt as to the truth of these charges, as to what these offenses are, and as to the guilt of the defendant. And at the end of this trial, then, at that time, on your oath as jurors, I'm going to be asking you to find this defendant guilty, and no more.